Good evening. It's Wednesday, March 24th, 2021 at 7 o'clock. This is a special board meeting of the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education. It is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is a time for public participation for those who have chosen to reach out to us during the meeting as indicated on the agenda item. Mr. Liming, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Carpenter?
Here.
Mrs. Dorn?
Here.
Mrs. Long?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
And Mrs. Slothman?
Here.
All right, all are present. Please stand as you are able and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic that stands for one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
All right, our main item of business this evening is the reports to the board on district finances. So I will turn that over to Dr. Kozad.
Thank you. I know, obviously we've been talking a lot about district finances, not only in the past, 3 or 4 months, but actually for a few years here. So we have some discussion. Obviously, we have a levy on the ballot in May, but I just want to give some background, kind of where the financial situation where we're at. So we move on to the next slide. So again, this is just to give some context, and this is not necessarily new information. Maybe a little bit of it is new, but we tend to look at these things fairly often because these are kind of the big pieces here. So we've had 4 phases of reduction since 2018. And those reductions have totaled a cumulative of over $4.8 million since 2018. So that's a cumulative total. And we have reduced.
Quick question here. There was some misinformation floating around about that being a cut per year, an annual cut of $4.8 million. And so what I'm understanding is the cut since 2018 was a cumulative cut, as you just used that word, but I just want to emphasize and underscore that. A cumulative cut of 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021, adding up to $4.8 million, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
it's
thank you.
Total. Yep.
Thank you.
No problem. We reduced our staff by 33 positions, and 17 of those have been are certified. So 17 of those have certified. A vast majority have been through attrition, but we did do some RIFs, which was reduction in force a couple of summers ago. Also, some information to note is that our total expenditures have leveled out. So over about the past 3 years, we've spent about the same as we have for the past 3 years. So there really hasn't been an increase in our total expenditures. Also to note is our state foundation funding is still not at the 2017-18 level. So again, the state reduced us in last fiscal year, and then they reduced us in the next fiscal year. They have provided or given some of that money back to us for this fiscal year. But just to note is our foundation funding is still not at the level as it was in 17-18. Also, our cost per pupil is about $11,355. That's about the same as what it was last year. Sorry. It's now $824 less than similar districts. So throughout the state, ODE, through their district profile report, provide this information to us. And so last year, we were $530 less per pupil. Now it's $824 per pupil for similar districts, and about $1,100 less than the state average. So we're spending about $1,300. We're spending about $1,300 less than the state average. And last year, it was about $1,100. So again, those gaps continue to widen between our our per pupil spending and those of similar districts and the state average.
Dr.
So
Kozak,
just to get-
I'm sorry, before you switch slides there, go ahead. Before you switch slides, I have a comment.
Sure. Go ahead.
Are you finished? I didn't mean to interrupt. So, okay. This
That's
number,
okay.
this is not some mysterious number that somehow the state, makes known, behind the scene to the district. If you want to validate this number and do it as far as comparisons with other districts throughout the state, it's very simple. You go to, I can't give you the link in an intelligible way here, but if you do a search, I think it's on the Ohio Education's website. You look under the district profile report, a simple Google search will take you there. I think it's actually listed as the Cutt-Patterson report. You can break it down by year, and you can pick, you can get a spreadsheet that's enormously helpful to compare district to district in terms of how much money each district gets, how much of their funding comes from the state. That's where you'll see like the number of 26% that Bellbrook gets, whereas the average for the entire state is about 44%. You'll see some districts are getting upwards of 80 or 90% of their funding from the state. So it's an enormously helpful document, readily available to you, anybody in the world, frankly, I guess. And also, an interesting thing of it is when you take a look at the $11,355 per cost per pupil, you take the number of students we have, about 2,700, right? And you multiply that by that number, it magically comes out to that 28, 29, $30 million budget that we say is needed, to run the school system in today's dollars. So I won't do the math in public here without a calculator anyhow. But again, this is not some mysterious number here, and our community needs to understand that. You can readily find the source for this information. You can do the math yourself. You can see the percentage, the total budget that the school district uses. Any funds we get for the schools, they are necessary to provide that education for our students. And, it's pretty simple in that regard. And so, again, these are not mysterious numbers. They're easily verifiable. And it's a little difficult to understand why this district should operate at less than the state average and continue to do so. So, anyhow, food for thought.
Yep.
Thanks.
Good. Yep. So, all this information is found on Ohio Department of Education. Just search in their search engine for a profile report, and you'll be able to find it.
Right.
Some other background information: our November 2020 levy, if passed, would have brought back phase 4 reductions, which included high school busing, K-5 STEM, K-6 art, librarians, and 85 advisors, which are clubs, activities, and sports. And because of the past 3 levy failures, we did not collect $6.6 million in funding from 2019 and 20. So
Right.
anytime you pass a levy, it automatically collects in the next next calendar year. So, for example, if a levy is passed in May, it would start collecting in January. If it passes in November, it starts collecting in January. So regardless of when it's passed, it's always collected in the following year. So that's just another piece of this puzzle here. To piggyback off the $4.8 million in cuts, we've not collected $6.6 million in funding. So that's another important piece to the puzzle here.
Dr. Kozad, just to be clear, the 6.6 is the delta between current and if the first levy would have passed, money that would have come.
Correct. So if the first levy would have passed, we would have collected about $3.3 or so million in that year, and then in the next year would have collected $3.3 million. Yes,
Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
From the first levy. Correct. Good clarification there. We can go on to the next one. So as we all know, we have an issue on the May 4th ballot, even though there's not an issue number. The May 4th ballot, 7-year emergency operating levy that will yield about $3.22 million, which equates to about 4.9 mils. And again, emergency levy is just it collects a certain dollar amount and doesn't grow. So that's the kind of the nuances behind the emergency levy. Also, this is different from our past levy requests. Our past levy requests have been continuing. This is a 7-year. The past have just been for either new money or a replacement levy. But those have been about 5.7, the equivalent of about 5.7 mils. So obviously we're collecting, instead of 5.7, we're collecting about 4.9. And the amount of money we're collecting is about $100,000 less or so than the 3 previous levies would have collected. So this levy is different and also costs about $28 less per $100,000 house. So we're at about $171.50 per $100,000 house, what this would cost a homeowner in Bellbrook-Sugarcreek.
Per year.
So
Per year.
per year, correct. That's per year, about $171.50 per $100,000 per year, correct.
Thank you.
Yep. And so if we go on to the next slide, I know in the past couple of meetings here, we have had some discussions of whether, if the May levy does pass, like November, would there be some things that would come back, or if it doesn't pass, or there's some ramifications on that way. So looking at, if it does pass, what are some possibilities that would come back? And then if it doesn't pass, what are some possibilities, some consequences of that? So Josh, if you can move on to the next slide. Thank you. And so administrators and I, Mr. Liming, have met for a lot of hours trying to digest all the information. And, obviously there's a very hard decisions. In an ideal world, we would love to bring back all the reductions or even just the phase 4 reductions, but the financial piece of that is just not wise to do all of that. And so we have to be very cautious, conservative, and as we make decisions, if to bring anything back. And as we've done in the past, we have to continue to let the budget guide us and determine what things would come back, would go away, and so forth. So we also need to think not just, the next year or two financially. We have to think not only 3 years from now, 5 years from now, but 7 or 10 years from now also, because anything that comes back now, there's a cumulative impact to that where, let's say you bring back something that's $25,000 this year. Well, the 5-year equivalent of that would be $125,000 if you bring that back now. But if you bring something back $25,000, 2 years from now, and you're looking at a 5-year look, it's only about $75,000. So I think everybody understands that cumulative effect. That's an important piece to keep in mind also. But I really think as we have tried to look at the possibilities of possibly bringing something back if the May levy does pass, and trying to look at the long-term financial stability of the district also. I think I would like to have the conversation starter of looking very strongly at bringing back K-5 STEM. That's a lot of the feedback as we listen to feedback from folks, and the academic impact also, but also the feedback we get from folks or from kids of, their feedback also. But again, looking at that through a financial lens also. So of looking to bring back K-5 STEM, and then also, some of the things that were really impacted, that could have been impacted, but I think COVID really impacted them also at the 7 to 12 grades, or 6 to 12 actually. A lot of those extracurricular kind of activities, events, clubs, plays, those kind of things that students are directly involved in. I think those are, an integral piece of schooling also. And I think we need to strongly look at bringing back the clubs and the activities. I know we reduced by about 85 supplementals. I'm really trending in the direction of bringing back 31 of those. And again, those would be direct student clubs, activities. I know we had a couple of sports teams cut also. So bringing those back so that all the teams would be back, but not bring back the other supplementals that the other 54 supplementals there. So, and again, I think that would also, we would be able to maintain our current programs. We would be able to keep our class sizes fairly steady of where they're at right now. And again, the other piece is looking at, as openings do come up, of taking we've always taken a very close look at those and see if we need to fill those, but continue to take a close look at those also and seeing if those need to be filled if the class sizes can stay fairly steady or in that range. So I don't know, thoughts or ideas, comments on that?
I'm really happy to hear that K-5 STEM would be something that could come back. That has been sorely missed, I think, by our elementary students. And having the supplementals that hit the sports teams and the clubs is good for the 6 to 12 grades as well. At least that's something that comes back for all, at least something coming back for all students across our educational district.
I would like for us to, I know it's not, I don't think it's part of tonight's assessment, unless Kevin Lyman, you can do it on the fly, but it really continues to trouble me that, in some cases, 2.5 or 3 days of the week, the libraries in our schools are closed. And I think there's something fundamentally wrong with that. When I walk into a school building and I look and it's on a Monday and I'm told, the library will be open first thing Thursday morning, I find that very troubling.
Absolutely.
And so, again, with a focus on all grades being able to regain something if the levy passes, certainly STEM adds to the K-5. The K-5 STEM adds to the overall structure of the school system to provide STEM opportunities for all grades. And then as well, they need to be able to get to the library, and it shouldn't just be on that 2 or 3 days a week, or 2 days a week, or 2.5, or whatever it is. It's, to me, again, it's just a klaxon call when you go into a school and the library is closed. That's just fundamentally wrong with the school system situation if we're faced with that. So I would really advocate strongly that we find a way within that budget, even if it means dipping into additional risk. It's clear and it's prudent to take a conservative approach to this, but we also know that as time goes by, we can get less funding, certainly, as we saw with the COVID cuts here, but we can also get more funding through, additional ways that we, are surprised by at times. It's not likely. It's not certainly nothing you can count on, but I would prefer to not go with a really conservative approach when that conservative approach cuts out what I think is something vital in the fundamental purpose of a school. And so I would advocate strongly that we return to 2 librarians, 2 media specialists, so we can get the school system fully up and running with the libraries 5 days a week, in my opinion, the way it ought to be. Thank you.
I understand that, certainly the checkout rate is about half of what it has been in the past, and that aligns with having the library open only about half the time. And certainly we are in the business of education, and that's an area where I, would agree with Mr. Price that, if we can find a way to get the librarians back as well, that would certainly be an ideal scenario. Well, ideal scenario under the circumstances. Are there other thoughts from board members?
I agree.
Go ahead, Virginia.
Oh, I just said I agree.
No, I agree as well with those priorities. If something were to come back, those would be the 3 things that I would most like to see. I don't want to be the naysayer in the room, as I'm the person with the young children who are probably really most keen on seeing these exact things for my own, selfish reasons for my children. I am very aware, though, that this is a 7-year levy, and in 7 years, this money ceases to exist without us going back to the voters. I There definitely needs to be something happening in between now and then for this to pass, where we have to start getting creative and finding a way to make this board, or not make this budget more resistant to inflation and overtime risk. I am not saying I don't want these things to come back. I certainly do. I think I want to see the numbers, because if they're a significant amount of bang for a relatively reasonable, budget, absolutely. It's really hard to have this conversation without the corresponding dollar figures that go along with each of these things. And like I said, I'd like to see this conversation take the flavor of these would be our priorities if we can bring things back, rather than a promise, because I think there are a lot of don't know yets about out years.
That's a good point, Audra. I also think that that by making some choices and some priorities, we really are establishing a priority list as compared to a promise. And we can certainly word it that way if we go ahead with something like that in a resolution. But I think that's kind of a given, that this is what our priorities would be in order to be able to deal with any levy that would pass.
Again, I think that, as we look at the information and look at the financials, I think it's extremely, doable for the STEM and for the supplementals. Just trying to be equitable throughout K to 12, of K to 5 of getting something back, and then 6 to 12 getting something back, just trying to be equitable in that. I think if we really dug even deeper, I really think that we can make it happen to bring in a media specialist or two back. I think we really can do that if we dig a little deeper into other places and try to see cost savings in some other places. I really think that those are probably the highest priorities, and academically and impact on kids' lives are probably the highest priority at this point. And so I think we can confidently make that happen financially.
Yeah, Kevin here again. And my position would be that we need to bring back 2 media specialists. I don't want to see a library closed for one day in any school ever. I just think it's just not acceptable. And that's my, I'm one person on the board here, but that's just how I feel about it. I know we're in a slightly different age here where people have Chromebooks, they have Kindles and things like that to read, but there is just something to be said about going to a library and picking a physical book, or finding, that's probably the better thing, of finding a physical book on the shelf. It is so hard to find when you just have a, endless list of digital books. It's just hard for that book to catch your eye that's on the shelf. So I would strongly advocate for both media specialists to be returned. And again, I know we assume some risk with that because, we want to go with the conservative approach, but time will tell, right? I mean, we can go conservative now and then come up short in our educational opportunities for our children. Or else we can, push ourselves a little bit closer to that conservative level of comfort, but yet certainly know at that point we've done, our best, for our children. So that's just my position on that.
Dr. Crozet, I do know the other cut that has hit people significantly and we hear the most about is busing. But am I correct in saying that to bring back busing at any level would be a much more significant financial impact than what you're proposing?
Again, depends on what you define as significant. It would be an impact on the budget, and that's something, you know, we can continue or could continue to look at. I think the challenging part is finding bus drivers is really challenging. And again, if you layer too many things of these priorities, you know, there's a breaking point at some point. So as we prioritize, the breaking point is somewhere, you know, the 2 librarians and the busing there, in my perspective. And again, just as we talk here, it doesn't mean that things couldn't come back in the future if we let our budget be our guide of seeing that long-term picture. But again, I've gotten a little feedback from folks for busing at the high school and feedback from the others. Again, I think COVID has kind of covered some things also where people are maybe taking their kids where they normally wouldn't have in the past. Our high school folks, obviously there's an inconvenience of them not having transportation, but they have done a nice job of figuring it out, of getting rides with folks. And again, doesn't mean that there's not an inconvenience to some of those people, so I'm not saying that at all. But as we try to put together the priorities of academic impact and impact on students, the busing's coming up short of all those if the levy passes, we can do this. It doesn't mean that will never be done or we can't do it, but it just, to me, I had to align that might be a little difficult if we're going to do the other things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I understand. And I know
transportation
that's also
is
impacted. I was going to say that's also impacted by the fact that we haven't been able to buy new buses because of previous cuts as well. So we have to dig out of that hole.
Right.
Like, we're already at a loss in that particular area. I know. So
Right.
we're starting at a negative there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that
Transportation is something that it's not our priority, I don't think. We've got, you know, our priority is education and not transportation. Although transportation is important, don't get me wrong. But if we have to pick under the circumstances, we've got a reasonable solution going on for busing. And some of these other areas are without.
No, absolutely agree. We're talking about academics, but if we're talking about sports versus transportation, that's a valid, I think, you know, conversation to have. And I am not advocating for busing over these other things. I'm merely trying to get a handle on where the financials of each lie. And if, you know, if
right.
you could have these 2 things or this one thing, for example, that's helpful to know that they aren't all equal in bang for the buck, because they're not all equal in buck and they're not all equal in bang. So,
right. And again, the supplementals we're bringing back, there's only two of them are sports. The other 29 are activities, are clubs at the middle school, at the high school level. So Key Club, National Junior Honor Society at the middle school. I mean, those are just the play at the middle school. Those are things that were cut that aren't sports, but they round out the student experience for maybe those students that don't connect with sports that are extremely important for our kids. And I think we've seen through the pandemic that kids need to connect with each other. And I think COVID has covered some of that up. But I think our kids need more than ever to be in to be in the you know, a club or activity or a play or something that they connect with and able to connect with others. So even though they aren't academics, I think if we think through our years in school, those are probably some of the better memories that we have in those kind of situations. So only 2 of the 31 are teams, and that would just round out kind of at the freshman level and so forth.
Yeah, no, and I find all those to be actually, even including sports, to be even more important as we come back from COVID. I know we've been back in session, but when I say back, I mean kids can commingle and be maskless and socialize. And I think there are a lot of relationships that will need to be, you know, new friend connections that are going to need to be made, and you know, new networks that are going to have to be established or reestablished, because those kids haven't been allowed to, even though they've been in school, which is awesome, they haven't been allowed to, you know, experience
socialize
all of, you know, of each
socialize.
other.
Yeah.
Great point.
Well, and I think we received a really well-written email that talked about the clubs and the activities that need to come back. And as somebody who was in the chess club and the AV club and not so much in sports, sometimes those things kind of, in my opinion, get put to the side. So I was very happy to see that as something that's going to come back because it's very meaningful for a lot of people.
I guess, are we willing to, and again, I don't want to cut off discussion here, but are we trending towards the direction of K-5 STEM coming back, those 31, reinstating those 31 clubs and activities and 2 teams that were cut? And then also, I think I heard from Mr. Price of 2 media specialist librarians.
I think 2 is the right number too. Also,
is that we're kind of settled on?
Yes,
I
for
think
me.
that's where priorities lie. Is that the order of the priorities?
probably so.
Compared to what would be the other piece of that, or the priorities of bringing things
No,
back?
I mean, if we're talking about these things as priorities, if things can come back, to me, in my mind, that's put them in order. You know, the first, like, wait, there's going to be a cut line that happens at some point. We do have, you know, unknowns, and, you know, I feel like we should truly prioritize those things in order to say, you know, if this passes, we take a look at the budget. We know what comes out of Columbus this summer in regard to COVID, and, you know, like, Kevin, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what potentials are there. I know we've got negotiations happening. There are unknowns, and so I think prioritizing those things is important, and then waiting to see what we have before we decide how far the cut line, like how far down the cut line can be drawn, is important.
Sure.
For what it's worth, I think the priority, as we just outlined it this evening, is it, in my opinion. Because, yeah, it's been clear that the community has been very, I guess, bothered by the lack of K-5 STEM. I think that's a universal for, you know, those that certainly have kids in that age range. With respect to the clubs and activities, I know when my son was in middle school, it was a big deal to him to be able to have the goal and work toward making it towards the National Junior Honor Society. When my daughter was in high school, you know, she learned so much from her opportunities with, for example, Model UN. And Dr. Cause, I don't know if that's one of the ones you're looking at or not as far as returning, but I would think that should be one. We should
Trial. Yeah.
You've got science fair. Things like those are enormously important. Again, they bring together teamwork and parents to produce a product, or not a product, a display, and they learn from it. And so I think and as much as I'm advocating for the librarian, it's not like we don't have the library as it is. It's inadequate, but we have it. But if we don't restore some of those clubs, and activities, we don't have them. They don't exist. So to me, it's a logical racking and stacking in the order: K-5 STEM, clubs and activities, and librarians. But I really want to see all of it, and I really have to believe that we can indeed have all of that. But I'm not a treasurer either. I don't have 30 plus years experience of balancing books and everything else. So I'm putting the school district out on a limb there, but that's just to the level which I can scrutinize numbers and do some, you know, math on my feet. You know, it just seems like we ought to be able to do all of these things. But if for some reason the state tells us next week they're cutting us by an extra $200,000 next year, $300,000, that obviously is going to have an enormous effect on anything we're talking about tonight. So
Right.
My thoughts on it.
I would concur. I would say the K-5 STEM and the supplementals would be on the same level. We do both. And then if we were able to go to the next level, we do 2 librarians, not choose to do 1. So that would be my priority order. Mrs. Sloughman, do you have a?
I agree.
Okay. Mrs. Long, anything more?
I agree as well.
Okay. Auditor, any more?
Yeah, I agree. I think if I had to pick one, I would probably start with the supplementals. Only in when we talk about equitable, when we're talking about a 7-year levy, all the kids in K through 5 are going to be in 6 through 12 at some point during that period of time. So at some point, all of the children that are currently in our district are going to benefit from those. But I don't disagree with you, David.
Okay.
Again, and again, to correct me if I'm wrong here, to me, it's almost a package deal of the K to 5 STEM, the clubs, activities, and then the media specialist. And then anything, more than that is we got to look at our budget and see what we can do. Again, we can't just look at next year, the year after, the year after. This has got to be a long-term look. So when I say let the budget be our guide of, we really, to be that, we got to be cautious on adding more and more and more back, even though I'd love to have everything back. But as if we would add anything back, maybe it's a creative way that we do something else creatively and try to, a win-win kind of situation. Again, I don't know what that could be, but again, we add this back and maybe it's creatively doing something else with something else. So, of the STEM, the supplementals, and the 2 media specialists, anything beyond that is we got to look at our budget and probably not something for next year. That probably more of a long-term kind of look, just as as it should be if we would get a levy pass of using that as our guide.
Dr. Cozad, do you have an additional slide past this one? Or is this it?
Nope.
Okay.
Is it?
Can I project something here then? I'd like to put something up on the screen.
Do we want to go on to that before we talk about if a levy does not pass? Or are you good? Because we got to the first part of it. If we're okay with, I think we're, Mr. Carpenter, are we okay with where we're at with that? I think we're okay.
I get that impression from everyone.
Okay. And then Kevin, Mr. Price, do you want to do that now or do you want to wait till after that?
I think it's kind of, what I'm going to show is basically tied to both aspects of this. So it kind of leads into it. I'm basically going to show the 5-year forecast is what it is. And I want to talk about some aspect of that. So if I can show that, because I think there's something important needs to be said here. Right now it shows Boardroom Presenting. So can I go ahead and do my thing here? Let's see, a window. Let's see. I took over right now. All right, then I got to find it. Here we go. Cancel. Bear with me. I get this thing to work right here.
Bottom right hand side where it says present now.
Yeah, but it's not bringing up the window that I've got. For whatever reason, it's not showing one of the windows. Hang on a second. See if I can work some magic. Do some Josh stuff here. What do you know? I figured it out. Josh, watch out. I'm going to come for your job. So what I had to do, I had to make it kind of like an active window instead of a minimized window. And then I was able to let it show up as far as one of the shareable windows. So are you all seeing the 5-year forecast there?
Yep.
Okay. So as best I can tell, this is the most current one. Kevin Lyman, you can correct me if I'm not, don't have the most current, but I think it's certainly close enough for what we need to talk about here.
It is. So
I could see one of the concerns, one of the potential narratives developing. Okay, you all have decided to bring back K through 5 STEM. You've decided to bring back 31 clubs, and you've decided in activities, and you've decided to bring back 2 librarians. And that's going to cost the community what? $3.2 million a year. Is that really worth that much money? Well, that's just not what's being talked about here. What is really happening is that, again, with this being the actual forecast, or the historical and forecasted funding, you go down to line 7020 here. what you're going to see is if the levy doesn't pass, here's the money that we have in each of these. This is fiscal year 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I don't know. Do you see my mouse as I'm moving it? Does that show up?
Yep, it does.
Okay. So there we are in 21. The state recommends we have 10% of our budget, so on or about $3 million. So we kind of meet that this year. But then look what starts happening, in 22, 23, 24, 25. This is where, really bad things are going to start happening to the school system.
Right.
And considering you're often a lead year away from when a levy does pass to be able to have money, that's why we are in a dire situation as it is right now. So forget the things we just talked about bringing back. This is where we are before you know it. And again, we really get below the state's recommendation here. But the point being, when you pass, if this levy passes, then starting next year, fiscal year 22, we get half of $3.2 million because the way the fiscal year works. So you get your $1.6 million here, 3.2, 3.2, 3.2. So once again, math in public here, that's 9.6 and 1.6, that's 11.2. So if we don't add anything else back at all, we have $4.2 million in the bank in 2025, which is just slightly over what the state would recommend as a minimum. So when we add back those things we just talked about, it isn't like we're spending $3 million a year, to get those. No, we're spending some hundreds of thousands of dollars to get those back. But they have a cumulative effect, as Dr. Kozad often, reflects upon. So those would be, each year is going to have that effect. So anyhow, we need, short of bringing anything back, we need the $3.2 million a year to avoid this train wreck that's coming right here. And it's at which point, if the levy doesn't pass, we're going to have to start cutting more stuff so we avoid this train wreck. But I guess, so that's why I thought I'm really touching on both, the positives if it passes and the potential negatives if it does, in fact, the real negatives if it doesn't. But I just want to make it really clear that $3.2 million a year does not get you 2 librarians, K through 5 STEM, and 31 clubs and activities back. No, that funding is contributing to the overall health of our budget, and of which, with that $3.2 million per year, we can take a portion of that, relatively small portion of that,
Yes.
and use that to bring back some of the critical elements that we've defined here. So it's really important that the community understands this. $3.2 million doesn't get you 2 librarians, okay? And it's very important. It's understood.
Kevin, thanks for bringing this up. Can I jump in too to say that, and Kevin Liming or Dr. Kozad, correct me if I'm wrong, but that end of year cash balance being in the red, we legally cannot do, right? Like, this isn't the federal government that can end their year.
That's correct.
With a deficit. So when we talk about why is this an emergency, why is this an immediate need, it's not to buy things 4 years from now. It's because to avoid the red, whatever that, I can't see the dates at the top there, that's 2020. So the end of fiscal year 2024 is in the red right now. So we would have to make significant cuts in the next 2 years prior to that to avoid being in the red in 2024, because we are simply legally not allowed to deficit spend.
Right.
So,
When I submit forecasts,
need is so immediate. It's not a need not until 2024. It's a need to start making significant change right now, because we can't make that change in 1 year.
Right. Mr. Liming?
when I submit a 5-year forecast, I was just going to say the state looks at my forecast, and if that number is in the red 2 years out or less than 2 years out, we're put into fiscal caution. They send someone down to sit with me and Dr. Kozad too, and we go over how are we going to make cuts and changes to get that number into the black without assuming a passage of a levy. That's when things get kind of ugly, when you have to make, they're not absolutely forcing us, but they're strongly directing us to do something ASAP to get it out of the red. And that's the scary thing about that red figure moving up within 2 years of the present.
So Kevin, that would pretty much be, you'd start having those hard discussions with the state probably about a year from this coming July 1st, thereabouts.
That's about right, yes. Unless
Yeah.
some of these numbers change. And I will say, I've said this before, but a 5-year forecast, the best we can do with what we know right now. And lately, things have been changing so much with the surprise cuts, and then they'll come up with a surprise grant that we didn't know we were getting, or workers' comp decides to give us some money, or we're cutting some area. So we're about like the stock market right now. We're getting big swings, and we're not in like the stock market in that we're at an all-time high. But I mean, we get these swings, big swings in different directions, and I don't feel really comfortable, with years 4 and 5, very accurate that is at that number, because there's nothing anybody could do to predict some of this stuff.
And I think it's important to note too that the fiscal year for us as a district ends in July. So it's not like our fiscal year 21 is nearing completion already. It's not like the rest of us who just started 2021. So it's 6 months closer than it even appears.
Right. And we do have to act in advance, especially if we're talking about sometime we're talking about a position, or if we see we're $1 million short in an upcoming fiscal year, you have to act pretty far in advance of that, because there are certain things you can't do right in the middle of a fiscal year. You have to, if it's a position, maybe you can't do anything with that till the beginning of the next school year or something. Then it's not really affecting your finances until you have several months without that salary or something. So I'm just pointing out that we have to start well in advance of the negative number if we're trying to make changes to alleviate that.
I'd like to show something else while I got my screen up here.
And I'm fine with, by the way.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
I'm just going to say I'm fine with what we've been talking about bringing back. I just thought I haven't really spoken to that, but I'm fine with the 30 K5 STEM and the 2 librarians. I think we could probably work that in. But anything beyond that is a little scary to me, and I do like the line, the idea of how the budget looks as we go along into the future, make our decisions on some of these things with that in mind also. We do that anyway.
Yes. So my goal,
let's just keep that in mind.
Right.
My goal in showing this screen was, again, as I make 2 points here, it's the things that we're bringing back. Yes. We're looking to bring back, which are the K-5 STEM clubs and activities, and the 2 librarians, media specialists. It's that, but the biggest contribution of that $3.2 million is to avoid this right here, because otherwise we have a train wreck. And again, Kevin Lyman has to start talking to the state about that the 1st of July, 2022. So 14 months from now, there's really hard discussion. There are really hard discussions that start with the state. I'd like to show one other thing while I've got the screen up here. This is from the much lauded, frequently referred to state auditor's report. And it talked about, this particular section of the report here. Again, this is an independent review of our district's health, financially, expenditures, et cetera. And, one of the things that, that should be looked at is one of their, I guess, things they pointed out is what I have here. Is this highlighting showing up to everybody? Okay. All right. So what they're saying here is that to address the deficit we were just kind of pointing to, that red stuff on that, spreadsheet, they're saying, hey, the district could also choose to reduce teaching positions in order to address the remaining deficit. In order to fully address the deficit, the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek local school district would need to eliminate an additional 16 teacher positions. that would be devastating to our school district. But the point being, if a levy is not passed, that's what's going to happen. I'm not saying 16, or I don't know. It'll obviously shake out. These are recommendations from the Auditor of State. But this is something they've identified. It's like, okay, well, reduce teaching. Well, when you reduce teaching, if you have, math and public here again, but if you have 4 teachers teaching 100 students, well, guess what? There's 25 students per class, right? Well, now all of a sudden, if you go to 3 teachers teaching 100 students, you have about 33 in a class. And that's an exaggeration of probably what would really happen here. But the reality, the absolute reality is, if we start cutting teacher positions, we will see increased class sizes. That's just simple and absolute reality. So again, this is not our determination of what the impacts are going to be. Again, this is a recommendation of what could be done from none other than the Auditor of State, Keith Faber, performance report about a year ago. So again, bad things are going to happen if the levy doesn't pass. Very good things can indeed happen here, as we've just outlined. It keeps us out of the red, and it brings back some vital educational things for our students. STEM activities, clubs, and librarians. But just as more than that, and that's enormously important, right? Those things. But more than that, it's going to be the additional losses that are going to happen as we have to take aggressive actions to address the glowing red that's happening in fiscal year 24 and 25.
And the negative that comes along with increased class sizes is you have less individualized attention, less differentiation ability within the classroom, less inclusion kinds of things as well. It's a ripple effect that's going to hurt students far beyond a single year. It's going to be a ripple effect that hurts them for a long, long time. So yeah, I would certainly advocate that we do everything we can to avoid the increase of class sizes.
I think the good news is we don't have to say the levy passes in May, or I don't know, pick one. Student sports activity fees increased by up to $1,000, whatever, or something. Pick something else. We're getting rid of 10 teachers. We're not there yet, right? Because of some very effective budgeting and hard decisions that have been made to date that have basically headed that off. But so right now we're not talking about imminent cuts if this doesn't pass. But I'm just trying to give, the smoke's on the horizon there. It's like, whoa, what's that? They're coming. And so this is with the passage of the May levy, you're going to see things restored to the district that is going to be very pleasing, I think, to a good segment of our parental, our parents here. And then also, we basically have avoided this train wreck that's going to be happening before we know it. So.
Anything else, Mr. Price? We'll go back to Dr. Kozad then.
At the end, I want to show people how to get to that Cut Patterson report, but I'll do that later.
Okay. All right, Dr. Kozad.
Okay, and yeah, so if the May levy does not pass, again, obviously that those things that we kind of stand still with where we're at with those, the librarians and the K-5 STEM and those activities, but then also, again, like I said earlier, we wouldn't lose any money or not gain additional money because we collect in January. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is, as you need to start those cumulative effects a little earlier also. So what I would propose is probably up to the cutting of or reducing about 3 K-12 staff members and 3 K-12 teaching staff members through attrition, and I'm not quite sure where those would be. We need to look at numbers and so forth, and then also continue to look. It's going to make it increasingly challenging for us to fill other open positions, and or to have the same class size and or have the same course offerings. So those decisions and those impacts are going to become increasingly difficult as we move down the path here. Whereas in the past, if we were kind of on the fence with numbers wise of filling something, maybe we were right there of, do we fill it or not fill it? Probably in the past, over the last 5-10 years, we'd probably say, let's fill it. Now, that scale is going to tip the other way of, we probably either shouldn't fill that or we need to wait even longer to see if that position filled. So again, as things become open in the spring here, we're going to take an extremely hard look at things and see, up to those 3 staff members or those staff positions. Okay, it's all going to be through attrition. Those staff positions where we could possibly not fill something. And so at this point, to me, that's as far as I would like to go, because again, I don't even want to say this, I don't even want to mention this. However, that there is another chance in November before we would lose funding. However, those, then we're in much dire straits at that point. In November, of those things really looking at us. So, that's kind of where I'm at. So, any questions or thoughts about that?
So you're saying a total of three staff positions?
Up to 3, correct?
3.
Yeah. Depending on numbers and so forth, or where those would come from, I'm not sure yet. But we would, as those numbers kind of shake out and enrollment shakes out, and really take a close, hard look at those.
Okay.
Again, we do every year. We take a close look at everything, but it's going to be even with the sharper pencil and a sharper, sharper eye to it. And like I said, in the past, maybe if we had filled something, probably not going to fill it if it's at a tipping point there. It's going to tip one way or another.
Okay.
But as like we said in the past, as the farther we go along here, and we've already seen it, it's going to become increasingly difficult to keep the class sizes steady and to keep offering the same things to our students, which is going to be lost opportunities for our students.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I think regardless of if you start, I don't want to start talking about November either, but I think we also can't count on anything in November. We have to understand that it's a school and changes get made in the summer. So things
right.
in November, positive or negative, are very hard to change at that point. So if we go into the summer, we have to come out of the summer presuming that we've got what we've got. We can't count eggs before they hatch, nor can we make cuts halfway through a school year in most cases. You can't pull a 3rd grade teacher and say we have one less when she's got a class full of students. You can't cut a lot of those things in the middle of a school year. So
right.
This levy is going to tell us what we've got to, use, what we have in our pocket this summer. And that's how we're going to have to start the 2020 fiscal year 2022 school year. And so
exactly
hopefully
right.
That's a positive perspective this summer, rather than having some very difficult board meetings in June and July.
All right. Are there other comments on what to do if levy passes or if it doesn't pass? Okay. Our next item on our agenda is our open communication. Did we have anyone sign up for sharing anything with the board?
We did not.
We did not. Okay. So we go on to resolution. I've been making some notes here as we've been discussing. And so we'll see if this is what we are, what our consensus is. That we would resolve to establish a priority for returning student services if our levy passes in May. Priority number 1 would be K-5 STEM and 31 supplementals, and priority 2 would be 2 media specialists. And if the levy does not pass, we would reduce up to 3 K-12 staff positions through attrition. And that would be our priority. Does anyone want to confirm that with a motion?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Okay, Mrs. Sloughman, and who, I'm sorry, I couldn't tell who was second.
All right, second.
Mrs. Dorn.
Mrs. Dorn, thank you so much. Any further discussion? I appreciate the candor and the openness that people have had in having this discussion very much. So these are not easy choices, for sure. Any other items? Okay, Mr. Liming, please call the roll.
Okay, Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Mrs. Sloughman,
Was that me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
yes. I'm sorry. Okay, and Mr. Carpenter.
Yes. Motion passes. All
David,
right.
could
Any
I have
other
that
board comment?
motion when, could you send me that motion at some
Alright.
point so I word it properly?
Sure. I'm at the board offices, so I will slip it under your door.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Price, you said you had one other item that you wanted to show.
Yeah, I'd like to just show the community how to get to that Cup-Patterson district report. I just want to, so again, the mysterious numbers about percentages and cost per pupil and whatever, so people can just know where that comes from. So if I can take control here again, let's see here, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I got to do my Josh thing again here, just a second. Josh, you probably already knew this, right? But you got to have it as a window before it'll let you pick it as a window. It can't be minimized. So,
Mr. Bowles, I don't think he's really gunning for your spot.
there we go. So what you do? So what you can do is just do a simple Google search here, district profile reports, CUP report, Ohio Department of Education, education.ohio.gov. You go there, it brings you to this page. Actually, let's just go there. Let's just click on it, just go straight to it. So you get that. You got it for all the years, almost forever. Even like when I was born in 1980, they've got it. So just kidding.
Don't boast your youthfulness now.
So anyhow, so you can pick, like, for example, the fiscal year 20 district profile report. It gives you all the information about how that's built and compiled and structured and everything else. How it's labeled, and it's really, really interesting. So then you go down there and you click on this little Excel report, and then it brings up. I'm about to bring up another window here. Give me a second. I'll stop sharing and I'll bring up the other window. Let's see here. Bear with me. 9% now. Window. There. Share. All right. You probably see an Excel spreadsheet now, correct?
Yep.
I've never gotten it to work, but apparently you can go in here and you can type the particular district name, and then it populates all this data. I don't know if you guys know how to do that, but it's probably because I've got an ancient version of Excel on my computer here. I don't have, it's a 2007 version, so that's probably what the issue is. But regardless, then you can go over here across the bottom. You got this thing called district data, and you see the 608 or whatever it is districts throughout the state. And then, so for example, I go over here. Let's take a look. For example, let's find district, federal, district non-tax.
Kevin, in that other tab,
Bear with me.
there should be a little drop-down menu in that tab.
Yeah, I think it's because the version of Excel I have. I think that's really what's going on there.
Tab in there, and you can, the drop-down menu, find our district, and then you can do the same for those comparison districts.
So here, so if I go tab.
No, if you click in there, it should be, Yeah, it should pop up a little list. I think you have the wrong or a different version because usually there's a whole drop-down menu of all the districts.
I think it's driven by, again, the fact I've got an old version of Excel here. So it's opening up a newer version of Excel with, with that. So at any rate, so let's see. So district state revenue, column AW here is the one we want to take a look at. And then you go over here and you scroll down now to find Sugar Creek. There it is. So now when I scroll over from there, let's just see where it matches up. Column AW is right there. There's that magical number that tells you, the district funding from the state. So there's your 25.65%. Those people that are math literate would know we'd go ahead and round that up to 26%. So that just shows you how this is structured. Again, with it being an Excel spreadsheet, you can say, okay, let's sort, on that. Sort and filter, A to Z. Hope that worked right. Nope, I want to go largest, smallest. You can see there are districts that have upwards of 80%, 77% of it from the state. And then most notably here, let's see if I click on that column, it'll tell you what, if you look, you all see it across the bottom there where it talks about the average. Right there. So there's where we get the 44% on average that districts get across the state. So out of 608 districts, the average that the districts get from the state is about 43%. Last year it was probably enough to round it up to 44%. But if anything, it's a percent lower this year than it was last year. And again, keeping in mind though that the Bellbrook system's getting about 26%. So we're 27% below the state average. And again, some districts throughout the state getting very high percentages, 70, 78%. I said 90% earlier, 80, 90%. That wasn't correct. But now I've verified what the typical or not the current highest number in the state is about 78%. So anyway, there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with this. If you're bored at 2 o'clock in the morning with Excel spreadsheet, you can rattle through that and learn some stuff. But the point being, what I'm really trying to illustrate is this stuff is just not just made up in some dark room over at the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek district offices. This is information that is verifiable and compiled by the state, not us. So you can use that. Again, facts are what's needed to be dealt with rather than just false conclusions or misinformation. And that's the best thing you can do is know how to find this type of information. So anyway, enough of that from me. So I'm going to stop now.
I think, Kevin, if I can chime in for a second, and Virginia, correct me because you're the math whiz, right? So we were talking about earlier that our cost per pupil is significant, like upwards of 10 to 11% less than the average.
Right.
And now if we're talking about the percentage of our budget is less than the average, well, a smaller percentage of a smaller budget equals an even smaller piece of the pie, right? Because when you multiply smaller decimals by smaller decimals, you get smaller.
Even smaller, that's right.
I had K to 5 STEM, see, like, so Kevin, we're going to sign you up for some of that T in the STEM. But no, I think those two things are compounding, and that's telling too. When you have a smaller cost per pupil and you're getting less of the smaller cost, that's even more impactful, or even less. Yeah. The money we get from the state gives us even less impact.
Right. All right. I did have one other quick comment, and that is I work with a lot of the vaccine distribution for the COVID-19 vaccines. We are now to the point where, if you haven't heard, you would be eligible for the vaccine at age 16 and up. Students in our district or who are 16, 17, 18 could get the vaccine. If you're under age 18, you do need parental consent, and most places probably need the parent to go along with the student to get the vaccine. course, if the parent isn't vaccinated, then they should sign up as well. But you can get them through the Greene County Public Health. You can get them through Kettering Health System. You can get them through Premier Health System. You can get them at Drug Mart or Walgreens and CVS and all those kinds of places. And that will be some of the ways that we can start to return to normal if having the vaccine is something that is within your wheelhouse to be comfortable doing. So I provide that just as a public service message. And is there anything else from any of our board members?
No.
All right, then do we have an motion for adjournment? Mrs. Long,
So moved.
do we have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Sloughman. All right, assuming there'll be no dissenting on the adjournment, Mr. Laming, please go ahead and call the roll.
Okay, Mrs. Long,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
I don't know. I might want to hang out with you guys for a little while longer. Let's see. Let me think about it. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Ms. Sloughman,
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter,
Regrettably, yes.
and Mrs. Dorn.
Yes.
All right, the motion passes. Thank you all. Appreciate the good, candid discussion. Have a nice evening.